All right. I want to introduce a new topic now that's a pretty big topic in modern web programming. And that is the topic of AJAX. And also, there's this thing called JSON that goes along with it. But AJAX is the main topic. And you haven't gone through this yet in your Zybook. I'm going to jump back there real quick and just show you that section 7.6 of your book and section 9.6 of your book are the two that talk about AJAX. And there's also this associated section on JSON. Okay, so both of those talk about it. But I intentionally skipped those because AJAX, in some sense, is kind of a different way of doing things than what we've been talking about so far. So let me jump back. You're going to be going through those sections in your Zybook, but I wanted to introduce them first. So AJAX is an alternative to our traditional way of having requests from the web server and responses. So everything we've talked about up until now, you have a browser, you have a web server, and each time the browser needs to send something to the server, it sends a request, an HTTP request. A web server takes in that, gets an HTML document and sends it back. Okay? And the best example of where that became a problem is back in, I don't know how long ago it was now, but mapping programs like Google Maps, or there's one called MapQuest. And MapQuest is a good example. MapQuest would have looked something like this. So you've got a map in your browser and you're using that to look at mapping or find a route or whatever. So we've got all these roads and trees and buildings and things like that. But the way that this particular website worked, that was called MapQuest, is that you would load basically each map you're looking at was just a big kind of image like this. And if you wanted to go to the next map, so like let's say we're looking at this and now I say, ooh, I want to look a little bit to the right. You would have some little navigation buttons like this up here, and you'd click on the one that points to the right. And all that button is actually a link to another HTML page stored on the web server that has the version of the map that's just to the east here. So let's say that this map is called map9.html. Over here on the web server, we'd have lots and lots of other files. We'd have map10.html and map11.html and so on and so forth, right? You can imagine there are tons and tons of these. And this isn't exactly the way it worked, but I think you'll get the point here. And so this button right here was just a link that went to whichever map we had over here, whatever section of the map was to the east of map 9. So maybe map 10 is to the east. So we'll say map10.html. So that's all this little button does. Okay, is it makes a request for another page. It basically goes and gets the URL for map 10, and each of these other buttons would do the same thing. So maybe this one leads to map 17, and this one leads to map 8, or so on and so forth. So what would happen is, you'd be looking at the map, and you'd say, oh, I want to look at something over here to the east, something to the right. So I'd click that button. This browser would send, as we've always seen, an HTTP request for map10.html. The web server would go find that map 10, and it would send map 10 back. Okay. And of course, all that takes time, right? And just a request going across the internet by itself takes time, but also these maps are very detailed things that have lots and lots of data in them. So it takes a while for map10.html to come back. Okay. And then the browser, like it always does, so it's got a brand new page. It gets rid of this entire map 9 page and now has to render all of map 10. So especially when internet connections were a little bit slower, this was kind of an issue, right? Like literally you'd be looking at this map, you'd say, okay, I want to look to the right, and you'd wait a few seconds until the next map finally displayed on your page. And then you want to look to the right of that, right, or to the east, and you'd click east again, and it'd get map 12 or whatever, or map 11 or whatever. And they'd make that request, and that would take a while to come back and then take a while to display. So that was the traditional way of doing all web requests. Okay, you would make a request, an HTTP request, and a brand new HTML document would get brought back, and the entire page would basically reload. A brand new page would reload. Well, people started deciding that maybe that wasn't the best way to do things, because especially if you like have a map like this, okay, it might be better, okay, instead of bringing in a whole new map, it might be better to just say, if you want to look a little bit to the right, only make a request to the web server for a little bit of information that goes over here, and don't get rid of all this that's already on the page, because maybe we still want to see most of this. We just want to look a little bit to the east, and just make a request for just a little bit more data. So rather than actually making a request for an entire new HTML page, or we're going to have to reload this entire page, we could actually instead just send a request for just a little bit more information from the web server to get a little more data about what goes over here, and then we could actually use this same HTML page to actually display that information, just add the little bit of extra data. So shift this map a little bit and show the new data here on the right edge of the page or something like that. Okay, so the way that is done, I'm gonna go ahead and erase all this. And this doesn't just go for maps, this goes for anything. When we've got a web page loaded over here, and we don't want to reload the entire web page, we just want to add a little more information to it. Okay, and so the way that's done is, instead of relying on the normal browser mechanisms for making an HTTP request and then get a brand new response and replace all this, instead we can use JavaScript. That's sitting here on the client side. That's what the J stands for, or at least originally stood for in Ajax. We can use JavaScript to make a request to some script that's running over here. It would be in PHP. In our case, it doesn't have to be, but it would be in PHP. So we can use JavaScript to make a request to some script that's running over here. And instead of that script sending back an entire HTML page, it'll just send back a little bit of data that then that JavaScript can process and then do whatever it wants to do to display the data, or whatever it needs to do to just make a small update on this page. So what happens is, this request that's coming over here now is not a request from the browser, not an HTTP request, but it's just JavaScript. So a little script in our page here actually runs, and it makes what's called an asynchronous request. That's what the A is, or at least the A originally stood for here. Ooh, where'd my mouse pointer go? That A. Okay, it makes an asynchronous request. And asynchronous means that we're not doing things necessarily in sequence. So before, we would make a request for a page, the entire page would come back. Then we'd go make another request for a second page, and the whole second page would come back. Now we're kind of getting out of sequence here. We're making this asynchronous request. Now, we've still got this loaded over here, and we're still doing some work over here, looking at the map, doing whatever we're doing. But while we're looking at this map page, we're having this asynchronous request kind of going on behind the scenes. And it goes over a script over here, processes some information, and then instead of sending back an entire HTML page, it just sends back some data. And that data originally was in what's called an XML document. An XML document, all of you have seen this at one point in time. Some of you have seen it more often than others. It's a document that has data just in a text file with some tags. So originally, that's what the X stood for. It would send back this XML document, and then the JavaScript over here could read through that document and get out whatever data it wanted. So it could be something like, oh, I don't know, I'm just going to make this up. It could be something like location, some tag location, and it could be X and Y, and have some X and Y coordinates, whatever, 20,000. Something like this. Looks a little bit like HTML. Okay, but this is XML, and end location. And this could, again, maybe involve some location data for some tree that needs to be located on the screen, or it could say location item equals tree, or something like this. Anyway, hopefully you get the idea. Okay, it's some sort of document with information. It's not a whole HTML web page. It's just an information, a document that has some information in it, so maybe some location information about a particular item to put onto the map. Okay, that data comes back, and then the JavaScript reads through that, says, oh, I got information about a tree. Of course, this has to be programmed to do this, but I got information about a tree. It's supposed to go at this location. Now I'll draw a tree at that location or something like that. Okay, so it's not a complete request for a web page, a complete response with an HTML document. Instead, it's JavaScript code on this side in the browser running a little function to make an asynchronous request to the web server. The web server sends back a document that has some information in it, some data in it, that comes back, and the JavaScript, there's another JavaScript function over here waiting for that to process it and do whatever it needs to do with that. Okay, and so I said that initially this was XML, but XML was rather verbose, which means it has a lot of text in it to communicate information, and people wanted some formats that were a little bit more compressed, so it didn't take up as much data as the information went across the internet. And so this new form of a document called JSON, or some people pronounce it JSON, originally stood for JavaScript Object Notation, but most people I don't think use it to mean that specifically anymore. But it's just a different type of document. I'll see if I can jump over and really quickly show you. A JSON document looks like this. So it's, again, similar. It's got some text file that's got some information. In this case, it's got information about people and cars or whatever, but it's the same concept as the XML document I was telling you about, location information. Okay, it's some document that comes back. It's got some data in it, and the JavaScript on this side can actually process the data that comes to that document and do whatever it needs to do. Okay, so that's this idea of Ajax. It's again going away from this concept, this normal concept of request a web page, send back a web page, and instead just saying, as needed, request a little data. There's a script over here that's not generating web pages, it's generating data, querying data in a database, whatever it needs to do, and then it sends back a little bit of information, and the JavaScript processes that. So you're effectively putting a lot more of the website on the client side. The JavaScript is kind of the thing that's doing a lot of the processing of things over here on the client side, and then it's just making little requests to the server to get more data as it needs it. So in some sense, this is a website that doesn't need to have lots and lots of pages. We don't need a map9.html and a map10.html and a map11.html. We can now just have something like just map.html, because we don't have to keep requesting new map pages. We can just keep requesting little more bits of data, and this file over here, the JavaScript, can then update this HTML page as necessary.